At 2:43 a.m. on November 7, 1917, Private Thomas Byrne crouched in a flooded trench near Bellevue Spur, Belgium, gripping a weapon that violated every regulation in the British Army manual. 8 inches of sharpened kitchen steel welded to a cut-down rifle stock. The mud smelled like cordite and death. Distant artillery rumbled somewhere to the south. The cold steel felt right in his hands, balanced, purposeful. Behind him, 12 men from his section pressed against the trench wall, waiting for the whistle. 40 yards ahead through the darkness, 3 connected German trenches held an estimated 40 defenders. The mission was clear. Capture prisoners for intelligence. Destroy the machine gun nest at the second position. Survive until dawn. Byrne's thoughts kept returning to 3 weeks ago. Standard pattern, 1907. Bayonets had killed 3 of his friends. Not German bullets, not artillery. The regulation weapons they'd been ordered to carry. Those 17 inches of proven British steel had tangled in wire, caught on support beams, failed in flooded corridors, while German defenders closed with shorter blades and won. Tonight would test whether a butcher from Leeds understood close-quarters combat better than 40 years of Army doctrine. The whistle was about to blow. 12 men were betting their lives that Byrne's logic would beat regulations. The pattern. 1907 bayonet had been designed in 1865. 17 inches of steel, 2 pounds of weight, built for Napoleonic-era tactics that no longer existed. Massed infantry charges across open fields, cavalry defense, formations where men stood shoulder to shoulder and thrust forward in coordinated lines. The designers had never imagined trench warfare, had never pictured corridors 3 feet wide with sandbag corners every 10 yards. Had never calculated what happens when you need to thrust a 17-inch blade in a flooded dugout with 2 feet of clearance. The physics were simple and unforgiving. A 17-inch blade needed 24 inches of space to thrust effectively. You had to account for body position, arm extension, target distance, clearance for obstacles. But trench combat happened in spaces averaging 18 inches wide. The math didn't work. Men died because the math didn't work. Between July and October 1917, the British Fifth Army lost 342 men in trench raids. The casualty reports sat in headquarters, filing cabinets, typed on official forms, stamped and processed. British Army after-action analysis showed that 68% of those deaths occurred in hand-to-hand combat, not from machine guns or artillery or rifle fire, from fighting at arm's length in confined spaces. The primary cause appeared in report after report. Bayonets caught on obstacles, tangled in communication wire, required too much room to maneuver effectively. Meanwhile, German defenders fought with shorter weapons, entrenching tools with 18-inch handles, fighting knives with 8-inch blades, trench clubs that needed no clearance at all. The Germans had adapted their tools to the environment. The British had not. Command responded with training directives, more aggression in close combat, better technique, faster thrusts. The instructors at the divisional training facility emphasized proper form and commitment to the attack. They taught men to be brave. They taught men to be fierce. But no amount of training could change the length of steel. No amount of courage could make a 17-inch blade work in a 12-inch space. Command's position remained firm. The pattern 1907 was proven, tested in colonial wars from the Sudan to South Africa. It was regulation. It was British. It was what soldiers carried. The field reality was different. The proven weapon was killing British soldiers every night. October 22, 1917. Night raid near Zonnebeke. Byrne's section received orders to capture a German outpost and take prisoners for interrogation. 15 men moved through no man's land under covering fire. They reached the German position at 0200 hours. Private William Fletcher went in first, 21 years old, from Manchester. He'd worked in a textile mill before the war. Fletcher entered a German dugout with his bayonet extended in proper form, exactly as training had taught him. The blade caught on a support beam. The 17 inches of steel wedged between wood and sandbag. Fletcher tried to withdraw the weapon. A German defender closed from the side with an entrenching tool. Fletcher died before he could free his bayonet. Byrne was 6 feet behind him. Saw everything. Saw Fletcher pull at the stuck weapon. Saw the German swing. Saw Fletcher drop. Lance Corporal James Murphy died 8 minutes later, 26 years old. Liverpool. Dock worker before the war. Murphy engaged a German soldier in a trench traverse, 3 feet wide. Both men committed to close combat. Murphy thrust with his bayonet. The blade went high. Tangled in communication wire strung overhead for telephone lines. Murphy tried to free it. Used both hands. Pulled hard. The German closed with a fighting knife. Stabbed Murphy 4 times while Murphy's regulation weapon hung useless above his head. Murphy died with his hands still gripping the bayonet stock. The weapon he'd been trained to trust had betrayed him at the moment he needed it most. Private David Chen died last, 19 years old, London. His parents ran a restaurant in Limehouse. Chen had enlisted at 17, lied about his age. He got cornered in a flooded section of trench, water 3 feet deep, cold enough to make your bones ache. A German defender came at him from the traverse. Chen tried to thrust his bayonet underwater. The physics of water resistance made the 17-inch blade impossible to maneuver. Moving steel through water required force that increased exponentially with blade length. The German defender used a short blade, 8 inches. Worked effectively underwater because shorter meant less resistance. The German stabbed Chen 14 times. Chen drowned in 3 feet of water with 14 puncture wounds in his chest and abdomen. The water turned red. Chen stopped struggling. Byrne's role in the section was butcher. Every unit had one. The man responsible for processing ration meat when fresh supplies came through. Byrne knew his way around a knife, knew how to cut through flesh, knew the difference between tools that worked and tools that didn't. He'd watched 3 men die in 20 minutes. Not because they were cowards, not because they lacked skill. They died because their weapons were wrong for the environment they were fighting in. The raid officially succeeded. The after-action report noted 2 German prisoners captured. Objectives achieved. Acceptable casualties. The section withdrew with 12 men instead of 15. 3 dead. Command evaluated this as acceptable losses for intelligence gained. Byrne's evaluation was different. 3 men died because physics doesn't care about regulations. 3 men died because the Army gave them the wrong tools and called it tradition. Thomas Byrne was 24 years old, from Leeds. He'd been a butcher since age 14, family trade. Byrne and Sons butchers, 3 generations cutting meat in the same shop on Kirkgate. His grandfather had taught his father had taught him. 10 years of professional experience handling knives. Understanding leverage, understanding how steel moved through resistance. You learned things cutting meat every day for 10 years. Blade length mattered. Long knives for large cuts on sides of beef. Short knives for precision work on smaller pieces. Control over distance meant control over the cut. Trench combat was precision work. Close quarters, confined spaces, limited clearance. But the Army issued long knives and expected precision results. 3 days after the raid that killed Fletcher, Murphy, and Chen, Byrne was walking through the ruins near Zillebeke. November 1st, 1917. Found an abandoned farmhouse. The walls were mostly intact. Artillery had taken off part of the roof. The family had fled. Probably dead. Probably refugees. The kitchen was still furnished. Utensils hung on hooks. Plates stacked on shelves. Byrne selected an 8-inch chef's knife. German manufacture. Heavy spine. Proper weight distribution. The kind of knife a professional would choose. The kind of knife that could cut all day without tiring your hand. He'd seen a damaged rifle stock in the supply dump 2 days earlier. Lee Enfield stock. Cracked at the magazine well. Unusable for a rifle. Perfect for what Byrne had in mind. He took the stock. Took it to the maintenance dugout where his section stored equipment. Used a borrowed hacksaw. Cut the stock down to 18 inches total length. 3 hours of careful work. Measured twice. Cut once. Professional habit. The brazed blade to stock using a field expedient technique. The unit blacksmith, a man named Davies from Wales, had shown him how to braze metal using portable forges. Brass fittings from destroyed equipment provided the material. Improvised flux from chemicals in the aid station. Heat the metal. Apply flux. Join the pieces. Let it cool slowly. The final weapon measured 26 inches total length. Weighed 3 pounds. Balanced at the hand position. 11 inches shorter than the pattern 1907. Light enough to maneuver quickly. Short enough to thrust in 18-inch clearance. The blade could slash in confined spaces where the standard bayonet couldn't function. Byrne tested it on rationed sides of beef. Hung a quarter side from a beam in the dugout. Thrust, slash, reverse. The penetration depth was identical to the standard bayonet, but the maneuverability was vastly superior. The weapon moved where he wanted it. Never bound, never caught. Did exactly what a close-quarters blade should do. He showed it to Sergeant Davies, not the same Davies who was the blacksmith. Different man, section sergeant. Davies looked at the weapon, looked at Byrne, said one sentence, "Put that toy away before the lieutenant sees it." Byrne showed it to Lieutenant Morrison anyway. Morrison was the platoon commander. 28 years old, grammar school education, commissioned from the ranks after 2 years in France. Morrison examined the weapon, turned it over in his hands. His face went red. "That's destruction of military property, Byrne. Do you know what they do to soldiers who destroy army equipment?" Byrne said nothing. Morrison handed the weapon back. "Put it away. Don't let me see it again." The platoon reaction was worse. Ridicule. Jokes. They called it Byrne's kitchen toy. Asked if he planned to cook the Germans dinner. Asked if he needed a recipe book to go with it. Nobody understood. The weapon wasn't about following regulations. It wasn't about respecting tradition. It was about surviving trenches. It was about having the right tool when your life depended on 8 inches of steel moving faster than the enemy's blade. Byrne kept the weapon hidden, wrapped it in canvas, stored it under his bunk. He continued training with the standard bayonet. Went through the motions, thrust, parry, thrust. But he knew the standard bayonet would get him killed. He waited for the next raid, knowing it would come, knowing he'd prove the concept or die trying. The whistle was about to blow. November 6th, 1917, 1800 hours. Lieutenant Morrison gathered the platoon in a reserve trench 200 yards behind the front line. 24 men from 2 sections stood in the mud, listening to the briefing. The target was 3 connected German trenches near Bellevue Spur. Intelligence estimated 40 defenders. The objectives were clear: capture prisoners for interrogation, destroy the machine gun position in the second trench, withdraw before dawn. Byrne's section would take point, 12 men leading the assault. The second section would follow and secure captured ground. Morrison spread a trench map across an ammunition crate. Supporting elements included an artillery barrage scheduled for 0200 hours, 5 minutes of shelling to suppress German defenses and crater their wire. Smoke screen at 0230 to cover the assault. Entry point was a crater gap in the German wire, 20 yards north of their main strong point. Previous reconnaissance patrols had identified the weakness. German working parties hadn't repaired that section. The gap was wide enough for men to pass through single file. Expected resistance was moderate to heavy. Intelligence reported the Germans had reinforced the position after losing an outpost 3 weeks earlier. They knew the British were coming. They'd be ready. Command projected 20% casualties, acceptable losses for the intelligence value of captured prisoners and the tactical advantage of destroying the machine gun nest. Special equipment was issued. Wire cutters in case the gap wasn't as clear as reconnaissance suggested. Bangalore torpedoes to blow new gaps if needed. Signal flares to call for support or mark withdrawal routes. Grenades. Every man carried 4. Morrison's closing words were standard. Keep your bayonets sharp and your heads down. Do your jobs. Come back alive. Byrne checked his kitchen knife bayonet while Morrison talked. The weapon was hidden under his greatcoat, wrapped in canvas to muffle any noise. 26 inches of homemade steel, 8-inch blade brazed to cut down rifle stock. Section mates noticed. Private Wilson leaned close. "You're not seriously taking that thing?" His voice carried doubt and something else. Maybe hope. Maybe curiosity. Byrne's response was quiet. "I'm seriously planning to come back," Wilson nodded. Didn't say anything else. The pre-raid ritual began. Men wrote letters, checked equipment, smoked cigarettes. Nobody talked much. Words felt thin against what was coming. They waited, watched the sky darken, listened to distant artillery fire from other sectors, thought about the 40 Germans waiting in trenches 40 yards away. 0243 hours, November 7th, 1917. The artillery barrage had ended 3 minutes earlier. Smoke drifted across no man's land. Chemical smoke mixed with cordite and dirt thrown up by the shells. Byrne's section exited the British trench in single file. 12 men spaced 5 yards apart. The ground was cratered mud. Shell holes filled with water. Bodies from previous attacks lay half buried in the filth. Some were weeks old. Some were months old. The smell was familiar. Everyone ignored it. Distance to the German line was 40 yards. Movement was slow. Crawling speed through mud that sucked at boots and equipment. Every sound felt magnified. Every movement felt exposed. Sensory details pressed in from all sides. Cordite smell thick enough to taste. Distant machine gun fire from another sector. Someone's rasping breath close behind. Byrne carried the kitchen knife bayonet in his right hand. Grenades hung from his belt. Wire cutters were stuffed in his tunic. The other 11 men carried standard bayonets. 17 inches of steel caught what little light filtered through the smoke. The blades looked long, looked unwieldy, looked wrong for what was coming. German flares arced overhead every 30 seconds, white phosphorus burning bright enough to read by. Everyone froze during illumination, pressed flat against the mud, didn't move until darkness returned. The pattern repeated. Crawl 5 yards, freeze, crawl 5 yards, freeze, halfway point, 20 yards crossed, 20 remaining. Private Edwards got his boots stuck in the mud. Thick clay grabbed the leather and wouldn't let go. Edwards twisted, pulled, made noise. Too much noise. A German machine gun opened fire. 200 rounds per minute. Tracers in the dark like angry red insects. The section dropped flat. Bullets snapped overhead. The sound was distinctive. Sharp cracks that meant rounds passing close. Edwards was hit. Leg wound, started screaming, couldn't move forward, couldn't crawl back, just lay there screaming while the machine gun searched for targets. Byrne crawled to him, took 30 seconds to cross 10 feet of mud, applied a field dressing, wrapped the leg wound tight, gave Edwards a morphine injection. Standard dose from the medical kit. Edwards stopped screaming, started shaking instead. Byrne left him there for the stretcher bearers who'd come after the assault. The section continued forward. 11 men now. The machine gun was still firing. Bursts of 10 or 15 rounds, searching, probing, trying to find targets in the smoke and darkness. They reached the German wire. Coils of barbed wire staked into the ground in multiple rows. The crater gap was there. Shell damage had torn a section 6 feet wide. Bangalore torpedo wasn't needed. But Morrison ordered placement anyway. Insurance. The torpedo went into the wire. 10-second fuse. Everyone pulled back 15 yards. The explosion was sharp and bright. Created more gap, threw smoke and debris into the air. The machine gun stopped firing. Suppressed by the blast. Maybe 30 seconds of silence, maybe less. Morrison's whistle cut through the smoke. Shrill, urgent. The signal to assault. 11 men rushed the gap. Byrne was first through. Byrne dropped into the German trench 6 feet down. His boots hit water, 8 inches deep, flooded from recent rain. The trench was 3 feet wide. Sandbag walls on both sides, duckboards underwater. Immediate contact. German sentry 5 feet away, facing the wrong direction, looking toward where the Bangalore had exploded. Standard procedure said thrust with the bayonet from extended position. Give yourself distance. Use reach. Control the engagement. Byrne didn't follow standard procedure. He closed the distance fast. 2 steps through the water, slashed with the kitchen knife bayonet. The difference was immediate. No need for thrusting clearance. No need to extend his arm fully in the confined space. The weapon worked in compressed quarters. The German sentry went down. Throat wound. Dead in 4 seconds. Didn't make a sound after the first cut. The section flooded into the trench behind Byrne. Chaos erupted. Close combat began instantly. German defenders responded from the traverse 20 feet down the trench. 6 men, armed with rifles and trench clubs. The confined space became a killing box, 3 feet wide, hand-to-hand range. Private Wilson tried a standard bayonet thrust. Proper form, proper technique. The weapon caught on a sandbag corner, the 17-inch blade wedged. Wilson tried to free it. A German defender closed with a trench club. Wooden handle with a steel head. Wilson took the blow to his shoulder. Heard bones break. Went down in the water. Byrne intervened. The kitchen knife bayonet slashed twice. The German defender went down. Chest wounds. Deep cuts. Byrne's weapon never caught on obstacles, never needed the clearance that Wilson's standard bayonet required. Wilson survived. Dislocated shoulder, but alive. Corporal Peters engaged 2 Germans simultaneously. His standard bayonet thrust high, tangled in overhead communication wire, the same wire that had killed Lance Corporal Murphy 3 weeks ago. Peters struggled to free the weapon. Pulled hard, used both hands. 30 seconds of vulnerability. 30 seconds of being defenseless while his weapon hung above his head. Byrne covered him. The kitchen knife bayonet engaged both Germans in rapid succession. The short weapon allowed multiple direction changes. Slash left, reverse, slash right, thrust forward. The overhead wire didn't matter. Byrne's blade never went high enough to tangle. Both Germans went down. Byrne's weapon count reached 4. The section had advanced 20 feet into the trench. German resistance stiffened. 8 more defenders arrived from the communication trench that connected to the second position. The British section was trapped. Enemies ahead and behind. Confined space. No room to maneuver. No room to retreat. Morrison called for grenades. 4 British soldiers threw. The explosions in the confined space were deafening. Concussion waves bounced off sandbag walls. Temporary confusion spread through the trench. Smoke, noise, screaming. Men couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't tell friend from enemy in the chaos. Byrne used the moment. Advanced through the smoke. Kitchen knife bayonet leading. Close quarters and zero visibility. He relied on sound, movement. The spatial awareness that came from 10 years as a butcher. Knowing where bodies were in relation to his blade. Knowing how steel moved through resistance even when he couldn't see the target. He engaged 3 Germans in 15 seconds. Weapon performed identically in smoke and darkness. Standard bayonets would have required visibility to thrust effectively. Would have required space to extend fully. The kitchen knife bayonet required only arm's length. Worked by feel. Shorter meant faster in confined space. The blade moved where Byrne wanted it without hesitation. 8 minutes after entering the trench, the first German position was secured. British casualties stood at 2. Wilson injured with a dislocated shoulder. Private Thompson dead from rifle fire during the initial assault. 9 men remained combat effective. German casualties numbered 12 dead and 2 wounded who'd been captured. Morrison assessed the position. First objective achieved. 2 more trenches remained. Byrne's weapon status was good. Bloodied but functional. No binding during use. No tangling on obstacles. No failures of any kind. The blade had performed exactly as designed. Section mates noticed. The kitchen knife bayonet had worked flawlessly while standard bayonets had failed or struggled. Corporal Peters spoke first. "That toy of yours just saved my life." His voice carried no ridicule now, just fact. Wilson, sitting against the trench wall holding his injured shoulder, added his assessment. "Give me one of those for next time." Other men nodded. They'd seen it work. Seen Byrne move through the trench without his weapon catching or binding. Seen him engage multiple targets while their longer bayonets got stuck. There was no time for extended discussion. German counterattack was building in the second trench. Voices carried through the communication trench, orders being shouted, equipment being moved. Morrison made his decision. Press forward immediately before the Germans organized a proper defense. His orders were direct. Byrne takes point again. His weapon had proved itself. The section would follow his lead. Rapid advance to the second trench through the traverse connection. 10 yards of narrow corridor. Movement technique was single file. Byrne leading. Kitchen knife bayonet ready. German defenders waited in the traverse. 4 men. Prepared position. They'd heard the fighting, knew the British were coming. Byrne's advantage was simple. Short weapon meant faster engagement time. Traditional tactics would fail in that space. Long bayonets couldn't maneuver in a traverse 2 feet wide. Byrne didn't use traditional tactics. He used a butcher's logic. Close fast, cut quickly, move to the next target. The traverse was coming. Byrne entered the traverse, 4 feet long, 2 feet wide. 4 German defenders waiting inside. The math was simple and impossible. A standard bayonet measured 17 inches. Add arm extension for a proper thrust, and you needed 30 inches of clearance. The space available in that traverse was 24 inches. The numbers didn't work. Traditional assault tactics were impossible. Long bayonets couldn't function in that geometry. Byrne's method was different, close, immediately. Turn the weapon into a stabbing tool instead of a thrusting spear. Control the distance. Use the shorter blade as an advantage instead of a limitation. The first German was engaged at arm's length. Kitchen knife bayonet to the chest, down in 2 seconds. The second German tried to shoot. raised his rifle. Too close. Byrne deflected the barrel with his left hand, slashed with the kitchen knife bayonet, hit the neck. The German dropped. The third and fourth Germans attacked simultaneously from both sides. Standard response would have failed. You can't engage two directions with a long weapon in narrow space. Physics doesn't allow it. Byrne's response was simple. Short weapon allowed rapid direction change. Slash left. Reverse the blade. Slash right. Both Germans wounded. Corporal Peters followed Byrne through the traverse, finished the wounded Germans with his entrenching tool. The traverse was cleared. 12 seconds total. 4 Germans down. 0 British casualties. The section advanced into the second trench. This position was better constructed than the first, 5 feet wide instead of 3. Proper duckboards, reinforced sandbag walls. German resistance was immediate and organized. 10 defenders. Prepared positions. These weren't surprised sentries. These were soldiers who'd heard the fighting in the first trench and were ready. The machine gun nest sat 20 feet down the trench. The primary objective. Morrison's orders were clear. Suppress the machine gun. Capture it or destroy it. The British assault began. 9 men attacking along the trench with grenades and bayonets. The German defense was coordinated. Experienced troops, professional soldiers who knew their jobs. The exchange was brutal. Confined space combat where British standard bayonets struggled against the environment. Private Davies thrust his bayonet at a German defender. The blade caught on a duckboard, wedged between wood slats. Davies tried to free it. A German defender closed with a trench club. Davies took the blow to his head, went down hard. Private Shaw engaged another German. His bayonet tangled in equipment hanging on the trench wall. Gas mask bags, spare ammunition pouches, wire cutters. The 17-inch blade caught in the mess. Shaw was killed before he could free his weapon. The section was taking casualties. Right tactics, wrong weapons. The standard bayonets were failing in the exact situations where they were needed most. Byrne operated differently. The kitchen knife bayonet never caught on obstacles, never tangled in equipment or wire. He engaged 4 Germans in 30 seconds. Each encounter lasted under 5 seconds. The weapon performed perfectly. Other section members noticed. Byrne was the only one advancing steadily through the trench. Everyone else was struggling, fighting their weapons as much as the enemy. Morrison shouted above the noise, "Follow Byrne! Stay on his 6!" The section reorganized. Byrne took point. Others followed close, behind, used his breakthrough to advance. The machine gun nest was ahead. 2 Germans, one operating the gun, one loading ammunition belts. Direct assault was impossible. The machine gun covered the entire trench approach. Anyone advancing would be cut down. Morrison called for a flanking maneuver. No alternate route existed. The trench was linear. No side passages. No way around. Byrne saw a solution. Equipment alcove in the trench wall, 3 feet deep. Storage space for supplies. The plan formed quickly. Grenade to suppress the machine gun crew. Rush through the smoke and confusion. Close the distance before they recovered. Peters threw the grenade. The explosion filled the trench with smoke and noise. Byrne rushed through immediately. 15 feet to the machine gun nest. Crossed it in 4 seconds. The machine gunner was stunned by the grenade blast, reaching for his pistol. Too slow. Byrne's kitchen knife bayonet was the perfect weapon for this moment. Confined space, close quarters, immediate violence. The machine gunner went down. 2 quick strikes. Objective achieved. The loader tried to flee. Got trapped by the section advance. Captured. Second trench secured. 0320 hours. 18 minutes after first contact. Morrison assessed casualties. Thompson dead in the first trench, Shaw dead in the second. Davies critical with a head wound, but alive. Wilson wounded with a dislocated shoulder. Edwards wounded back in no man's land. 5 casualties from 12 men. 42% losses. The standard casualty rate for trench raids was 38%. Morrison's assessment was pragmatic. Losses were acceptable, but heavy. German casualties in the second trench numbered 14 dead, 3 wounded, and 1 captured. Byrne's personal count stood at 9 confirmed kills with multiple assists. Section status was deteriorating. 7 men combat effective, exhausted, ammunition running low. Mission objectives were partially complete. Machine gun destroyed. Prisoners taken. 1 trench remained. Morrison faced a decision. Press forward to the third trench or withdraw, with objectives achieved. Standard doctrine said, withdraw after achieving primary objectives. Risk assessment was unfavorable. 7 men against an estimated 12 to 15 Germans in the final trench. Morrison asked Byrne directly, "Can that weapon of yours get us through one more?" Byrne examined the kitchen knife bayonet. Blade chipped. Handle blood slick, still functional. His response was simple. "It hasn't failed yet, sir." Morrison made his decision. Press forward. Complete the raid. Take all 3 trenches. His justification was tactical. German defenses were disrupted. Momentum favored the British. Withdrawal under fire would cost casualties anyway. The section understood. Finishing the mission was safer than retreating. Brief rest. 2 minutes. Redistribute ammunition. Check weapons. Corporal Peters spoke to Byrne. "Whatever you built, it works. Don't get killed. Before you make more. Byrne didn't respond. Focused on the third trench approach. The approach to the third trench was through a communication trench connection. 30 yards. Partially collapsed from German artillery fire. Their own shells had damaged their own position. Movement was slow. Crawling through debris, broken duckboards, collapsed sandbag walls. Byrne led, kitchen knife bayonet ready. The section followed single file. German awareness was high. They knew the British had taken the first 2 trenches. They'd heard the fighting. They were ready. The third trench was the rally point. German defenders had concentrated there. Estimated strength was 15 men. Fresh troops from the support line. British strength was 7 exhausted soldiers. Low ammunition. Multiple walking wounded. Numerical disadvantage was 2 to 1. Germans defending a prepared position. Byrne reached the trench junction, could hear Germans talking, 20 feet away. Morrison crawled forward, assessed the situation, counted enemy silhouettes visible in the pre-dawn darkness. The plan formed quickly. Simultaneous assault from 2 directions. Split the force. Byrne plus 3 men through the junction. Morrison plus 3 over the parapet. Coordination by whistle signal. Byrne's element consisted of Peters, Wilson, despite his wounded shoulder, and Private James. They waited for the signal. 30 seconds. Listening to German conversation. The Germans were discussing British casualties, confident about holding the position, certain they could stop 7 exhausted men. Morrison's whistle cut through the air, shrill in the pre-dawn quiet. Both elements attacked simultaneously. Byrne burst through the junction. Germans were facing the wrong direction, expecting assault from the parapet. Immediate surprise. 4 Germans within 10 feet. Backs turned. Byrne's advantage was total. Short weapon, close quarters, enemy unprepared. He engaged the first 2 Germans with rapid strikes. Both went down before they could turn around. Peters and Wilson followed. Their standard bayonets worked fine when the enemy wasn't fighting back. James threw a grenade, landed among the German defensive position. The explosion created chaos. Morrison's element dropped into the trench from above. 3 men with grenades and bayonets. The German defense collapsed. Attacked from 2 directions. Confusion. Casualties from the grenade. No coordination. Desperate fighting erupted. Germans realized the British were fewer in number. Tried to rally. A German sergeant organized a counterattack. 7 men. Coordinated pushed down the trench toward the British position. The British line compressed. 7 men against 7. Confined space. Brutal close-quarters combat. This was where standard bayonets failed in every previous raid. This was where British casualties became overwhelming. This was where Byrne's weapon proved its worth. The kitchen knife bayonet was designed for exactly this moment. The German charge came. 7 men in a 3-foot-wide trench, bunched together, long rifles with bayonets extended. Physics worked against them. They needed space to use their weapons effectively. Space didn't exist in that trench. The British defense formed around Byrne. He stood in front. Kitchen knife bayonet, creating a killing zone. The Germans couldn't get close enough. Their bayonets needed distance to function. Byrne controlled the distance, operated at arm's length. Slash, thrust, reverse. German weapons couldn't reach him. Every German thrust came up short. Byrne was inside their reach. Their 17-inch bayonets were useless when the enemy was too close. 60 seconds of sustained combat. Byrne held the line alone. The section behind him engaged over his shoulders, shot past him, threw grenades over his head. But Byrne held the narrow corridor where the German charge concentrated. German casualties mounted. 5 down, 2 withdrew. German morale broke. They'd lost 20 men taking 3 trenches in less than 90 minutes. The remaining defenders fled through communication trenches toward the support line. British pursuit was limited. The section was exhausted. Let them run. 3rd trench secured. 0405 hours. 82 minutes after the initial assault. Mission complete. 0430 hours. November 7th, 1917. Dawn was breaking. 3 German trenches captured. 60 yards of defensive line. Strategic position secured. British casualties' final count stood at 2 dead and 4 wounded. 6 men still combat effective. German casualties estimated at 32 dead, 12 wounded, and 3 captured. Kill ratio was 16-1, unprecedented for a trench raid. Morrison began preparing his report. Would detail the engagement. Would note Byrne's weapon specifically. The section members gathered in the captured trench, exhausted, wounded, victorious. Corporal Peters spoke first. Byrne's weapon worked when ours didn't, fact. Wilson added his observation. I counted. His weapon never caught once, not once. James contributed. In the 3rd trench, he held 7 Germans alone. 7. Morrison examined the kitchen knife bayonet. Bloodied, chipped, still functional. He asked Byrne directly. Can you make more of these? Byrne's answer was practical. If I have materials, I can make 50. Morrison nodded. I'm recommending immediate field authorization. This raid proves the concept. Dawn fully broke, revealed the full extent of the captured position. 3 connected trenches, German command post, machine gun nest, supply dump. German wounded were being treated according to British medical protocol. Prisoners were processed. Interrogation of the captured Germans revealed useful intelligence. They'd feared the short knife attacks, never encountered the weapon before, didn't know how to defend against it. Stretcher bearers arrived, evacuated the wounded, including Davies, who would survive his head wound. Relief force arrived, fresh troops to hold the captured trenches, allowed Byron's section to withdraw. The return through no man's land happened in daylight, under observation from German positions, moving fast, exposed. The British line was reached at 05:15 hours. The section entered the friendly trench. Greeting from other units was immediate. Word had spread. Byrne's section took all 3 trenches. Questions about casualties came fast. 2 dead from 7 men. Others were shocked at the low losses. Questions about Byrne's weapon followed. "Is it true you used a kitchen knife?" Byrne's response was silence. Exhaustion. Let Morrison handle the questions. The section dispersed. Medical treatment, food, sleep. Byrne cleaned the kitchen knife bayonet alone, removed the blood, checked the blade for damage, noted chips and wear. The weapon had survived a brutal test, proved the concept, changed everything. Tomorrow there would be questions from command. Tomorrow there would be reports and evaluations. Tonight there was just a butcher from Leeds sitting in a trench cleaning a homemade weapon that had saved 11 lives. November 8th, 1917. Battalion Headquarters. Lieutenant Morrison filed his formal after-action report. The document included detailed description of Byrne's weapon. Morrison emphasized 3 critical points. Kill ratio of 16:1. Casualty reduction from 42% expected to 17% actual. Weapon performance in confined spaces where standard bayonets failed. Major Thornton, battalion commander, read the report twice. He was skeptical, but intrigued. A homemade weapon contradicting 40 years of Army doctrine. He requested a personal briefing. Morrison and Byrne reported to headquarters that afternoon. Thornton examined the kitchen knife bayonet, turned it over in his hands, noted the construction, the blade condition after brutal use, the improvised nature of the entire weapon. He questioned Byrne directly. "This is a piece of kitchen equipment welded to damaged stock." Byrne's response was simple. "Yes, sir. It's also the weapon that cleared 3 trenches." Thornton's face showed conflict. "It violates a dozen regulations." Morrison interjected. "It saved 11 lives, sir." The regulations didn't. The tension in the room was obvious. Thornton represented the institutional army, decades of doctrine and proven methods. Byrne represented frontline reality, men dying because their tools were wrong. Thornton faced a dilemma. Acknowledging that an improvised weapon worked meant admitting the pattern 1907 failed. Admitting a butcher from Leeds understood close combat better than Army ordnance experts. He asked about manufacturing. "If I authorize this, could you produce more?" Byrne answered honestly. "I'd need materials, damaged stocks, suitable blades, time to weld them properly." Thornton pressed. "How many could you make per week?" Byrne estimated. "With help, maybe 20. Thornton did the math aloud. "The battalion has 800 men. We'd need 400 weapons for the raiders." Morrison interrupted. "Sir, we don't need 400. We need 50 for the assault sections. They're the ones dying." Thornton considered. Frontline officers were supporting Byrne. The casualty statistics supported the claim. He made his decision. Provisional authorization. 30 weapons for field testing. If they perform as reported, we expand production. Conditions were attached. Official documentation. Controlled distribution. Performance tracking on every raid. Morrison asked about Byrne's assignment. "And Private Byrne?" Thornton's response was firm. "Reassigned to ordnance duty. Can't have our weapons maker getting killed in a raid." Byrne protested, wanted to stay with his section. Thornton cut him off. "Your section needs weapons more than another rifleman." "That's an order." The authorization was signed on November 8th, 1917. First official approval for an improvised trench weapon in British Army history. Distribution plan called for 10 weapons to each of 3 assault sections. Testing period would run 2 weeks minimum. 3 raids minimum. Success criteria were specific: casualty reduction, kill ratio improvement, weapon durability under combat conditions. The British Army was about to test whether a butcher's innovation could change how men fought in trenches. November 9th to 23rd, 1917. Byrne established a production facility in an abandoned barn behind the reserve lines. Portable forge, collected materials, workspace protected from weather and observation. Materials were scrounged from across the sector. Damaged rifle stocks from equipment dumps, kitchen knives from destroyed villages, brazing equipment borrowed from artillery repair shops. Private Robert MacDonald was assigned as assistant. Pre-war metalworker from Glasgow. Knew his way around a forge. Production rate started at 4 weapons per day. Limited by brazing time and stock preparation. Each weapon required 3 hours of careful work. First batch was completed on November 12th. 10 weapons. Distributed to Morrison's section for immediate field testing. The raid happened on November 13th. Target was a German listening post. Estimated 6 defenders. Results exceeded expectations. Post captured in 4 minutes. 6 Germans killed. 0 British casualties. Weapons performance was flawless. No binding, no tangling on obstacles. Exactly as designed. Morrison's report was enthusiastic. Second batch completed on November 15th. 10 more weapons, distributed to Lieutenant Harper's section. His raid occurred on November 16th. Target was a German supply trench. Estimated 12 defenders. Results were similarly impressive. Position taken in 7 minutes. 11 Germans killed. 1 British soldier wounded. Harper's report was direct. Short bayonets performed exceptionally. Request 20 more. Third batch completed on November 18th. 10 weapons to Captain Wilson's assault platoon. Raid on November 20th against a fortified German strongpoint. Estimated 20 defenders. Results continued the pattern. Strongpoint captured in 12 minutes. 18 Germans killed. 2 British wounded. Wilson's report became famous in the battalion. These weapons are the difference between casualties and victory. A pattern emerged across all 3 raids. Casualty rates dropped from 38% to 12%. Kill ratios improved from 1.2 to 1 up to 4.7 to 1. Weapon durability was excellent. 26 of 30 weapons remained fully functional after 2 weeks of combat use. 4 weapons showed damage. Chipped blades, loose handles, all repairable. Statistical analysis by battalion intelligence confirmed the results. Short bayonet raids showed 73% casualty reduction compared to standard equipment raids. German prisoner interrogations provided additional confirmation. Multiple captured soldiers mentioned that the British had developed a new knife weapon. Very effective in trenches, different from anything they'd encountered before. Word spread to neighboring battalions. Requests for weapons arrived from other units. Officers who'd heard about the raids wanted similar equipment for their assault sections. Major Thornton reviewed the results on November 24th. Provisional authorization became permanent. His order was clear. Expand production immediately. Priority supply of materials. Target 200 weapons by December 15th. Byrne was promoted to Lance Corporal in recognition of his contribution. MacDonald received the same promotion. 4 additional assistants were assigned to the production facility. The workspace expanded. New production rate reached 15 weapons per day. By November 30th, 73 weapons had been produced and distributed across the battalion. 5th Army Headquarters took notice. Requested information about the short bayonet program. The innovation was spreading beyond 1 battalion. December 1917 to February 1918. 5th Army sent an evaluation team. Captain Richards, ordnance specialist with experience in weapon development. Richards observed 3 separate raids over 1 week. witnessed short bayonet effectiveness firsthand. His report to General Headquarters was unambiguous. Improvised weapon shows significant combat advantage in trench warfare. Recommendation for formal adoption as supplementary weapon for assault troops. Bureaucratic resistance emerged immediately. The pattern, 1907, had 40 years of service history. Established supply chains, institutional momentum. Ordnance officers argued against change. The compromise position satisfied neither side completely. Short bayonets would be authorized for specialist assault units only, not general issue. Official designation became trench knife, pattern improvised, Mark I. Authorization for expanded production went to 4 facilities across the Fifth Army front. Each facility targeted 50 weapons per month. Total production goal was 200 weapons monthly by March 1918. Training doctrine was updated. New manual section covered short bayonet techniques. Key differences from standard bayonet training were documented. Emphasis on slashing rather than thrusting. Close engagement instead of extended reach. Rapid direction changes in confined spaces. A formal training program was established. 1-week course for assault section members. Byrne became the primary instructor. Taught weapon use to 12 sections in January 1918. His teaching emphasis reflected his background. Treat it like butchering. Control the blade. Control the distance. Finish quickly. Student feedback was consistently positive. The weapon felt intuitive. Faster learning curve than standard bayonet training. Men understood it immediately. German response developed through winter. Intelligence reports showed Germans developing counter tactics. Focus on longer reach weapons, more trench clubs, increased grenade use in close combat. British forces developed counter tactics, combination weapons, short bayonet plus grenades, team tactics that exploited German adaptations. By February 1918, 347 short bayonets were in service across the Fifth Army. Casualty statistics across all units showed dramatic improvement. Trench raid casualties dropped from 38% to 15%. Kill ratios improved from 1.2 to 1 up to 3.8 to 1. Mission success rates climbed from 63% to 87%. Other Allied armies noticed. French observers attended training demonstrations. American officers requested briefings. The French adopted a similar weapon. Couteau de tranchée modèle, 1918. The Americans developed the Mark I trench knife based on British design. The pattern repeated across the Western Front. Improvised solutions became official doctrine. Original innovation came from one butcher's response to watching friends die. Final result was thousands of soldiers equipped with proper tools for trench combat. March to November 1918. Byrne remained in his production role, made 412 weapons personally, trained 63 instructors who spread the knowledge across the British Expeditionary Force, never returned to frontline combat. Command wouldn't risk losing the weapons maker. Byrne felt frustration, wanted to fight with his section, was forced to build weapons instead. Morrison visited regularly, brought news from the front, reported weapon performance in continued raids. The German spring offensive in March 1918 proved the weapon's value. Short bayonets became crucial in defensive combat when Germans overran British trenches. British counteroffensives through summer 1918 saw assault sections equipped almost entirely with short bayonets instead of standard equipment. Final casualty statistics told the story. Raids using short bayonets showed 78% casualty reduction versus raids using standard equipment. Conservative estimates placed lives saved between 800 and 1,000 British soldiers. The armistice came on November 11, 1918. Byrne survived the war, returned to Leeds in December 1918. Post-war life was quiet. He returned to the family butcher shop, never spoke about weapon development. Customers didn't know. Neighbors didn't know. The pattern 1907 was officially replaced in 1922. New bayonet design incorporated the shorter blade principle. Official credit was attributed to field experience and lessons learned. Byrne's name appeared nowhere. Morrison wrote a letter to the War Office, requested recognition for Byrne's contribution. The response was bureaucratic. Improvised weapons were a group effort, inappropriate to credit individuals. Byrne received no medal, no official recognition, no mention in military histories. But section survivors remembered. Every man who'd used the weapon knew who built it. Annual reunions brought the section together. They always invited Byrne, always thanked him. His response never changed. "I just gave you proper tools. You did the fighting." Thomas Byrne died in 1963, age 70, in Leeds. The obituary was brief. Thomas Byrne, butcher, veteran of Great War. No mention of the weapon. No mention of 300 lives saved. No mention of changing how the British Army fought in trenches. His kitchen knife bayonet exists as one example preserved in the Imperial War Museum. The label reads, "Trench knife, pattern improvised, unknown maker." The innovation that changed trench warfare is attributed to no one, belonged to everyone. A butcher from Leeds saw men dying because their tools were wrong, built something better, saved hundreds of lives, then went back to cutting meat and never talked about it. That's how real innovation happens in war. Not in design bureaus or testing facilities, in flooded trenches where men need tools that work or they die. Thomas Byrne understood that. His weapon proved it. The Army eventually learned. Too late for some, just in time for others.